Hello, my name is Michael Flores. Here is my keyword outline, and here is my PowerPoint. I will be grabbing pages as I move on in my speech. In the year 2017 alone, despite making up only 5% of the global population, the US contributed over 28% of the world's global carbon emissions, granting it the title of largest polluting country per capita, even beating out massive super polluter countries such as China, India, and even Canada. In this graph, we can see the global disparities in countries' carbon emissions per capita, showcasing how the United States has a massive lead in its carbon emissions per capita, even compared to countries that are required to have a large carbon emission per capita due to its intense climate, such as Canada. This is likely because Canada, China, and India, all countries I've listed as massive super polluters, all have carbon tax policies in effect to mitigate its large carbon footprint, while the United States currently has no policy such as a carbon tax in effect at the federal level. A carbon tax is one of, if not the best option that our country has in mitigating our large carbon footprint, especially when it comes to decreasing the contributions to climate change brought about by large corporations and the wealthy elite. Now, for those of you unaware, a carbon tax is simply a tax on every metric ton of carbon produced by every individual, household, or entity being a large company or corporation. In this speech, I will be going over the past, present, and future consequences of allowing corporations and polluter elite individuals to contribute to climate change with almost no repercussions, how a carbon tax can act as that necessary repercussion to mitigate the nation's carbon footprint, and finally, the benefits of implementing this policy as soon as possible. Now that I have at least introduced the concept of a carbon tax, allow me to go further in detail on what consequences we are yet to face if we do not do something immediately. For starters, environmental conservation is an issue that needs to be handled now before it's too late. Siskar et al. 2011 showcases that climate change presents both physical and economic issues. This is likely due to climate change bringing about a larger increase in national average temperatures. An increase in average temperatures leads to a loss in the nation's gross domestic product, or GDP. This is due to a large percentage of the nation's GDP being agricultural, or anything being farmed, or anything being related to farm or cattle. This especially affects states such as California, Wisconsin, and Texas, states that largely rely on the agricultural sectors of their economy. Along with this, Watkinson et al. 2004 showcases how the impacts of climate change are already being felt. For example, in this graph, we can see the national average climates from the year 1000 to the year 2000, with it especially highlighting the drastic increase in temperatures from the year 1980 to the year 2000, almost showing that it exponentially rises and compared to the last 1,000 years. Watkinson et al. Showcases that the effects of climate change are exponential, and that it is no coincidence that the hottest report of the year of the millennium happened to also be one of its last. Keep in mind that while this report was done in 2004, the year 1998, the hottest year of that millennium, doesn't compare in the slightest to the climates of the year 2021, showcasing how drastically this problem has worsened in less than 25 years. Now that I've shown to you how urgent the problem of climate change actually is, I can now dive further into the concept of a carbon tax and just how effective it would be in preventing climate change contributions from corporations and the polluter elite. With this, a carbon tax offers a twofold solution to mitigating climate change. And what I mean by twofold is that a carbon tax would only impact major companies and corporations, and a carbon tax would also generate revenue that can be put towards other green policies to mitigate our national carbon emissions to a greater extent. Baylor 2021 showcases how a carbon tax would only impact major companies and corporations. What this means is that a carbon tax policy would hit those with the largest carbon footprint the hardest. In this graph done by Tax Foundation, we can see how the bottom 50% of people would see almost a rebate once a carbon tax has been implemented, while the top 1% of people would see almost 3% of their income being taxed by a carbon tax due to the drastic difference in lifestyles and carbon emissions brought about by the elite as compared to the bottom 50% of people. Along with this, corporations who produce much more than the average national family does would also be paying much more in carbon tax as compared to the average family. For example, if a carbon tax taxed only 10 cents per metric ton, the average family would see themselves paying about $1.60 every year due to this carbon tax, while large corporations would have to pay millions of dollars every year until they mitigate their carbon footprint. Along with this, the revenue generated from a carbon tax could be put to good use, as seen by Klenar et al. 2018. What this means is that options to mitigate climate change that are currently deemed too expensive, such as the movement from fossil fuels to renewable energy or the encouragement of electric cars, could be funded by the revenue generated by a carbon tax. Now that I've explained how a carbon tax works and why it would be effective, I can now introduce some of the arguments against carbon taxing and why they do not hold up logically. The benefits of implementing a carbon tax far outweigh any potential cons. One potential con that people have brought up in the past is that carbon tax policies have been introduced and dropped several times in the past, as seen in the journal report done by Sue 2012. However, even in this article and in other arguments against carbon taxes, they concede that a carbon tax is a necessary first step in mitigating greenhouse gases. Along with this, multiple states have already implemented statewide carbon taxes. In this map, we can see states and Canadian provinces that have already implemented forms of carbon taxing at the state level. Even the city of Boulder, Colorado, highlighted in this map, implemented a carbon tax when its voters democratically voted it in at a citywide level, thus showing how states that have a large agricultural economy see the importance of mitigating their carbon emissions and have already taken steps to do so. Another argument that people have brought up is that climate change is a necessary evil in the steps towards energy independence through fossil fuels, as seen in the report done by Brongart et al. 2019. And while this may have been true in the past, this is also the exact same thinking that led to the issue in the first place. It was people thinking that climate change isn't as important as becoming energy independent that led to climate change becoming so much worse in recent years. And while we can all agree that both issues are of great importance, keep in mind that the worst case scenario of climate change is entire environmental collapse, whereas the worst case scenario of energy dependence is a national recession. We can see just how drastically worse the cases will become if we ignore climate change versus if we ignore energy independence. With these facts in mind, we can conclude with a solid plan on a policy that has been proven to work and the urgency with which we need to implement it. Again, a carbon tax is one of, if not the best option that our country has in mitigating our large carbon footprint, especially when it comes to decreasing the contributions to climate change brought about by large corporations and the wealthy elite. It's frankly absurd that despite making up so little of the global population, we contribute so much to the world's global carbon footprint. What this means is that we need to act, and we need to act now. Here printed on this page is multiple phone numbers that we can call to beg our state and federal politicians to bring up and implement the idea of a carbon tax policy implemented here in the United States. Here I've listed the phone numbers of the Texas state governor and both Texas state senators. And I desperately urge everyone watching this to contact their local politicians, their statewide politicians, and even their federal politicians, and urge them to start taking in mind just how dire the situation of climate change actually is and how we need to do something, and we need to do something now. Thank you.